The Midnight Stalker. The apartment smelled of fresh paint and old secrets. Anna stood in the center of her new bedroom, inhaling the scent of something unfamiliar, something almost too clean, as if it was covering up something else. The apartment was a spacious one-bedroom on the third floor of an old brick building in the heart of the city. The rent was suspiciously cheap, but she had been desperate to move. She needed a fresh start, and this place was perfect. Or so she thought. As she unpacked, the late afternoon light bled through the large window, casting long shadows on the wooden floor. The previous tenant had left in a hurry, the landlord hadn't said why, but Anna could still feel a lingering presence in the walls, as if someone had once lived here for a long, long time. She shook off the thought. It's just an old building, nothing more. By nightfall, the apartment felt colder than it should have been. Anna set up her bed, a simple mattress on the floor until she could afford a proper frame. She checked her phone, 10:42 p.m. Exhausted from moving, she brushed her teeth, changed into an oversized t-shirt, and climbed into bed. As soon as she pulled the covers up, a feeling of unease settled over her. It wasn't the kind of fear that sent your heart racing, but the quieter kind, the one that lingers at the edge of your mind, whispering that something is just a little off. The room was silent, too silent. No distant hum of traffic, no creaking pipes, not even the soft whir of the refrigerator. Only silence. She rolled onto her side, shutting her eyes. Then, in the darkness. Creak. Anna's breath hitched. It came from the hallway. Soft, deliberate, like weight pressing against the old wooden floorboards. She held her breath, straining to listen. Maybe it was a neighbor. The walls were thin, after all. But then. Creak, closer this time. Anna's stomach twisted. That was inside the apartment. Her fingers gripped the blanket. She told herself it was nothing, maybe the building settling, maybe she had left a window open, and the wind was shifting the old wood. Then, from the darkness. A whisper. Not words. Not even a sound she could recognize. Just a low, shuddering exhale, like someone was standing at the foot of her bed, breathing in the dark. Anna's eyes shot open. She forced herself to sit up, her pulse hammering. The room looked exactly as it had before, empty, undisturbed. The door was still locked. The window was shut. Nothing was out of place. Maybe she was just imagining things. She had been stressed. Maybe exhaustion was playing tricks on her. But still. She reached for her phone and checked the time, 3:08 a.m. Anna swallowed and shook her head. You're overreacting. Forcing herself to calm down, she laid back down, pulling the blanket up to her chin. Sleep. She just needed sleep. And then. A soft rustle. Like fabric shifting. Like someone moving. Right next to her bed. Anna's heart slammed against her ribs. She wasn't alone. Her breath quickened. She willed herself to move, to turn on the light, to do something, but she couldn't. Fear held her down like invisible hands pressing into her chest. And then. A quiet chuckle. Right next to her ear. Anna screamed. She bolted upright, scrambling for her phone, fumbling to turn on the flashlight. The moment the beam of light flooded the room. Nothing. The room was empty. The air felt heavy, thick with something unseen. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she scanned every corner of the room. The closet door was shut. The floor was bare. But the feeling remained. Someone had been here. Someone had been standing right next to her. Anna's shaking fingers gripped her blanket. She didn't sleep for the rest of the night. And in the silence, she swore she heard it again. A breath. Right behind her. Anna didn't sleep. She sat upright in bed, her blanket pulled tight around her shoulders, her phone clutched in her trembling hand. Every shadow in the room felt too deep, every sound too sharp. The chuckle, that horrible, quiet chuckle, still echoed in her ears. But there was no one there. At least, not that she could see. By the time morning light seeped through the curtains, she forced herself to move. She had to. Staying in bed, trapped in that paralyzing fear, wasn't an option. The moment her feet touched the floor, a deep shiver ran up her spine. The wood felt cold. Too cold. As if someone else had been standing there for hours. She shook off the thought and grabbed her phone. No missed calls, no messages. No proof that last night had even happened. Anna didn't want to admit it, but she felt like she was losing her mind. The day passed in a blur. She kept busy, unpacking boxes, arranging furniture, trying to fill the silence with normalcy. But the feeling never left, the heavy sensation that something was watching her. She caught herself glancing at the corners of the room, expecting to see something lurking in the shadows. Nothing was there. But the feeling only grew stronger as the sun began to set. By the time night fell, Anna had convinced herself she had imagined it all. Stress. Exhaustion. Moving into a new place alone. It made sense. That's all it was. And yet. She double-checked the locks. She made sure every window was shut tight. And she left the hallway light on. Just in case. 2:47 a.m. Anna wasn't sure what woke her. At first, everything was quiet. The dim glow from the hallway seeped into her room, casting faint, warped shadows across the walls. She sighed, shifting onto her side. Creak. Her breath caught in her throat. The sound came from the hallway. Slow. Heavy. Like someone deliberately pressing their weight onto the floorboards. Anna's pulse thundered. She reached for her phone, careful, silent, her fingers slick with sweat. She turned on the screen, 2:48 a.m. Creak. Closer this time. Anna's mouth went dry. She tried to convince herself it was just the building settling. That's what old buildings did, right? They made noises. They creaked and groaned and shifted. But deep down, she knew. This wasn't the building. This was footsteps. And they were coming toward her room. Creak. Anna's stomach twisted. Closer. She willed herself to move, but fear held her frozen. She could barely breathe, barely think. Creak. Right outside her bedroom door. A shudder ran through her as she squeezed her eyes shut. This isn't happening. This isn't real. Then. The doorknob turned. Anna's breath hitched. She watched in paralyzed horror as the knob twisted ever so slowly, as if someone on the other side was testing it, waiting. Then, a click. The door cracked open. A sliver of darkness spilled into the room. Anna's entire body locked up. She wanted to scream. She wanted to move. But she couldn't. Her eyes darted toward the doorway. There was nothing there. No shadow. No shape. But the door. It was still moving. Swinging inward, inch by inch, as if someone was standing just beyond the threshold, unseen. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. The air felt wrong, like the room itself was holding its breath. Then. A whisper. So close. Right next to her ear. You left the door unlocked. Anna's scream tore through the apartment as she lunged for the lamp, fumbling to turn it on. Light flooded the room. The door stood wide open. But nothing was there. No one. Only the empty hallway staring back at her. And yet. Anna's shaking gaze dropped to the floor. To the footprints leading from the hallway to her bed. To the set of deep indentations in the wooden floor, like someone had been standing right beside her. Watching. Waiting. She grabbed her phone with trembling fingers, her breath ragged, heart hammering. 3 a.m. Anna sat frozen, staring at the open doorway, the footprints, the silence pressing in around her. And then, from the darkness of the hallway, another breath. Closer. Anna didn't sleep. She couldn't. She sat curled up in bed, clutching her blanket like a lifeline, staring at the open doorway. The footprints were still there. The deep, unnatural indentations on the wooden floor remained, as if something heavy, something real, had been standing beside her bed. Watching. Breathing. Whispering. Her phone trembled in her hands. 3:15 a.m. Too late to call anyone. Too early for it to be over. But was it ever really over? A thought slithered into her mind, uninvited. What if it's still here? Anna's breath hitched. She felt it again, that thick, oppressive weight in the air, like something unseen was in the room with her, crouching in the darkness, just out of reach. She forced herself to move. I need to leave. Now. Slowly, she pulled back the blanket, her heart hammering as she swung her legs over the side of the bed. The floor was ice cold. Her skin prickled. It felt like stepping onto a grave. A sickening sensation crawled up her spine, the undeniable, gut-wrenching feeling that something was waiting. Watching. She moved cautiously, inching toward the light switch. The hallway stretched before her, dark and still. Too still. She reached for the switch. Then. A whisper. From the hallway. Low. Twisted. Right next to her ear. I see you. Anna's scream died in her throat as she slammed the light switch up. The hallway flooded with light. Empty. No one was there. But the air was heavy, thick with something she couldn't name. And then she saw it. The footprints. Leading into her bedroom. But none leading out. A sharp, icy terror wrapped around her chest. It was still here. Somewhere. Somehow. And then. The bedroom light flickered. Anna gasped, spinning toward the lamp on her nightstand. The bulb stuttered, dimmed, pulsed like a dying heartbeat. Shadows stretched across the walls, twisting, contorting. One of them moved. Her breath caught. It shifted, detached itself from the others. A shadow, not cast by anything. Not belonging to anything. It was wrong. The shape was all wrong, long fingers that curled unnaturally, a head that tilted too far, a body that was thin and jagged and too tall. And then. It turned. Anna's pulse stopped. The shadow faced her. And it smiled. A deep, grating noise filled the room, not quite a growl, not quite a whisper, but something in between. Something hungry. Anna stumbled back, heart hammering against her ribs. The shadow didn't move. But she felt it. It wanted her to. It wanted her to run. To chase her. To play. Her stomach twisted violently. She reached for her phone, her fingers barely brushed the screen when the light went out. Total darkness. Then. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Moving toward her. Anna scrambled backward, blind in the dark, her breaths coming in sharp, panicked gasps. The footsteps grew closer, closer, until she felt it. Breath against her face. Then. A whisper. Soft. Amused. Right next to her ear. Don't close your eyes. Anna's scream ripped through the apartment. She lunged forward, slamming her hand against the light switch. The moment the bulb flickered back to life. The shadow was gone. The room was empty. Anna stood there, shaking, gasping for breath. But she knew. It hadn't left. It was just waiting. Watching. And now, It knew she was afraid. Anna didn't sleep. She couldn't. Even with every light in her apartment on, she could still feel it. The thick, suffocating presence of something watching her. Waiting. The shadow had smiled at her. It had spoken to her. And it had told her not to close her eyes. The words still clung to her mind, sinking deep into her thoughts like rotten wood. But exhaustion gnawed at her. Her body ached from tension, her eyes burned, and her hands trembled from sheer fatigue. She needed to rest. But, what if she woke up in the dark? What if she didn't wake up at all? Anna pressed her back against the headboard, hugging her knees to her chest. She could see the entire room from here, every corner illuminated. Nothing was hiding. Not yet. She let out a slow, shaking breath. Maybe if I just close my eyes for a second. Just a second. Just to rest. Just. The light went out. Anna's eyes snapped open. Darkness. Total. All-consuming. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She threw her hands out, feeling blindly for the lamp, her fingers knocked it over. The bulb shattered on the floor. And then. The whisper. Right next to her ear. I told you not to close your eyes. Anna screamed, launching herself off the bed. Her foot slipped on the wooden floor, she barely caught herself, gasping for breath. The dark pressed against her like a living thing, thick and smothering, swallowing the air. She ran. Her fingers fumbled for the hallway switch, she hit it, but nothing happened. The lights were dead. A low, rasping chuckle slithered through the dark. Something was behind her. Anna didn't think. She bolted for the door, but the moment she grabbed the handle, it wouldn't turn. Locked. No. No, no, no. The chuckling grew louder. Closer. Anna pounded against the door. Help. Someone help me. The laughter stopped. The air became deathly still. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then. A sharp knock. On the other side of the door. Anna froze. The knock came again. Then. A voice. Low. Familiar. Her own. Anna, let me in. Anna's stomach plummeted. The voice outside the door was her voice. Muffled. Distorted. But hers. Anna, I know you're in there. Her breath came in short, ragged gasps. This isn't real. This isn't real. Another knock. Louder. Don't you trust yourself? Anna backed away, hands trembling. She turned. And saw it. A shape in the hallway. No. Not a shape. A shadow. It stood there, taller than before, its limbs long and wrong, its head tilted too far. It didn't move. It didn't need to. Because Anna could feel it grinning. And then. It whispered. Not with her voice. Not with a human voice. But with many voices. The lights won't save you. Anna's pulse stopped. And then. The lights flickered back on. The hallway was empty. The door was unlocked. And Anna was alone. But she knew. It wasn't gone. It was inside her apartment now. Waiting for the next time the lights went out. Anna didn't turn the lights off again. Not even for a second. But she was starting to realize, it didn't matter. The thing in her apartment was changing the rules. It wasn't just hiding in the dark anymore. It was creeping into her reality. And now, she wasn't even sure if she was seeing things as they truly were. She avoided looking into the mirrors. She didn't know why, only that something told her not to. But by the time she realized it, it was already too late. It started in the bathroom. Anna had just splashed cold water onto her face, desperate to keep herself awake. Sleep-deprived, trembling, barely holding herself together. She knew she looked like a wreck. But when she glanced up, her reflection didn't move. Her blood froze. For a moment, she told herself she was imagining it. That she was just too tired, too paranoid. Then, the reflection smiled. A deep, slow curl of the lips, a grin too wide, stretching too far. Anna's breath hitched in her throat. She took a step back. Her reflection didn't. It just stood there, smiling. Then, it raised a hand. Anna's stomach twisted violently. Her own hands were limp at her sides. She wasn't moving. But the thing in the mirror was. Slowly, the reflection's fingers pressed against the glass. The grin widened. And then, crack. A thin fracture splintered across the mirror, right where its fingertips touched. Anna stumbled back, slamming into the doorframe. The reflection laughed. Not a normal laugh. Not her voice. Something else. Something wrong. The mirror shattered. Anna turned and ran. It was getting worse. The mirrors weren't the only problem. It was spreading. At first, it was subtle. She caught glimpses of movement in her bedroom mirror when she wasn't looking directly at it. A shadow standing behind her in the hallway reflection. A hand reaching out from the bathroom mirror, before vanishing the second she turned her head. Then, she started seeing herself in places she hadn't been. Her reflection moved on its own. It wasn't just the mirrors anymore. It was in the windows. The glass on her phone screen. The television when it was turned off. And every time she looked, it was smiling. It was watching. And it was getting closer. The final straw came that night. Anna was sitting on her bed, staring blankly at the floor. Her nerves were frayed. She couldn't take much more of this. Then, her phone buzzed. A text. From an unknown number. Anna hesitated, then opened it. There was no message. Just a picture. Of her. Standing in the dark hallway. Smiling. Anna's stomach dropped. She was alone in her bedroom. But she knew. She wasn't alone anymore. Anna didn't move. Her fingers trembled as she clutched the phone, staring at the picture. Her. Standing in the dark hallway. Smiling. But it wasn't her. She was sitting right here. And then. The screen flickered. For half a second, the image changed. She saw herself again. But this time, the face was wrong. The eyes were too large, the pupils too dark. And the smile. It wasn't just wide. It was splitting. The corners of the mouth were ripping open, stretching too far, too deep, exposing raw, dark gums. And then. The screen went black. Anna's stomach lurched. She threw the phone onto the bed, breathing hard. This isn't real. This isn't real. Then she heard it. A sound. Low, wet, unnatural. A clicking noise. Like bones shifting. Anna's head snapped toward the hallway. And her breath caught in her throat. Because she was standing there. A second Anna. She was barely visible in the dim light, her body unnaturally still. And she was smiling. A deep, wide, splitting grin. Let me in. Anna choked on a scream and scrambled backward. The second Anna took a step forward. Her movements weren't right. Too stiff. Too jerky. Like a puppet on broken strings. Let me in. Her voice was almost Anna's. But not quite. It was distorted. Layered. Like more than one voice speaking at once. And then. It lunged. Anna slammed the bedroom door shut, heart pounding so hard she thought her ribs would crack. She threw her weight against it, fingers trembling as she locked it. Silence. Nothing. For a long, horrible moment, she thought, maybe it was gone. Then. A whisper. Right behind her. You locked the wrong door. Anna whirled around. And saw herself standing in the bedroom mirror. Grinning. But the reflection wasn't copying her anymore. It was moving on its own. Reaching. And then. The glass shattered. A hand, her hand, lunged out from the mirror and grabbed her wrist. It was ice cold. And it pulled. Anna screamed. She fought, twisting, kicking, clawing at the thing's grip, but the hand was strong. It yanked her closer, her reflection's face now inches from hers. The grin widened. Time to switch. Anna felt herself slipping. Her vision warped, the bedroom distorted, stretching, twisting like liquid. She was being pulled in. No. No. With a final burst of strength, she wrenched herself free. Her body hit the floor hard, glass slicing into her arms. The mirror exploded outward, shards flying everywhere. When Anna looked up, the reflection was gone. She wasn't sure if it had been forced back. Or if it was somewhere else now. Watching. Waiting. For another chance to take her place. Anna knew she wouldn't survive another night. She sat curled up on the floor, shaking, the shattered remains of the mirror scattered around her. The thing in the reflection had tried to take her. And next time, she wouldn't be fast enough. Her phone was dead. The lights flickered. The air in her apartment felt wrong. Heavy. Like something was pressing against reality itself, stretching it, bending it out of shape. She didn't know how to fight something like this. And then. A whisper. Right next to her ear. It's almost time. Anna bolted upright, heart slamming against her ribs. She wasn't alone anymore. She could hear it moving. Something pacing in the next room. Slow, deliberate footsteps. But they weren't normal. They were too light. Too hollow. Like something just barely pretending to be human. Anna pressed herself against the wall, breath shaky. Then. A shadow moved beneath the door. Long, spindly fingers pressed against the wood. And then. Knock. 3 slow, deliberate taps. Then. Let me in. Anna squeezed her eyes shut. No. Let me in. The voice was almost hers. But not quite. It was too many voices at once. Like something trying to mimic her. Then. The doorknob started turning. Anna's chest tightened. It shouldn't be able to get in. Not unless she let it. Right? Right? But then. A whisper. From behind her. You're in the wrong room. Anna whirled around. And froze. The closet door was open. And she was standing inside it. Her own reflection, grinning, eyes wide, pupils black. And then. The light went out. Darkness. Anna couldn't move. Couldn't scream. Couldn't breathe. Something cold wrapped around her wrist. And then. She was pulled. Into the mirror. Into the dark. The next morning. Anna woke up. She was standing in her apartment. The mirror was whole. The lights were on. Everything looked normal. Too normal. She felt empty. Hollow. Like a puppet in her own skin. And then. She looked at the mirror. And the real Anna was inside it. Eyes wide. Mouth open in a silent scream. Trapped. She raised her hands. banged against the glass. But the Anna on the outside? She just smiled. And then she turned away, leaving the real Anna trapped in the dark forever. The Forgotten Ones. Daniel woke up with a splitting headache. The alarm clock buzzed beside him, but it sounded off. Distant. Muffled. Something about the air in his apartment felt wrong. Stale, like an empty house left untouched for years. Rubbing his temples, he swung his legs over the edge of the bed and checked his phone. No messages. No missed calls. Not even a single notification. That was weird. His phone never stayed silent overnight. His sister, Maya, always sent her usual "morning, loser" text by now. Frowning, he scrolled through his contacts and pressed her name. The line rang. Once. Twice. Then. A robotic voice, "The number you are trying to reach does not exist." Daniel froze. What? He stared at the screen. Tried again. Same result. His heart skipped a beat. Maya had always had the same number. Something wasn't right. Something was very wrong. The streets were too quiet. Daniel had left his apartment, hoping the fresh air would shake the unease creeping into his bones. But as he walked, something gnawed at his mind. The people around him. They didn't look at him. Didn't acknowledge him. It was like he wasn't even there. At first, he brushed it off. Maybe he was just imagining things. Maybe he was still half asleep. Then he spotted someone he knew. Nick. One of his closest friends. Relief flooded him as he called out. Nick. Hey. Nick didn't react. Daniel waved, stepped closer. Nick, it's me. Nick walked right past him. Not just ignoring him, not even seeing him. Like he wasn't there at all. Daniel's blood turned ice cold. He spun around, watching the strangers passing him on the sidewalk. Not a single person looked at him. They moved around him, but never reacted to his presence. Like he was a ghost. Like he had been erased. He ran. His mind screamed that this was a dream, a trick, a hallucination. But it felt real. Too real. He needed answers. His parents. He'd go to their house. They would know him. They had to. But when he arrived, the door was locked. His childhood home felt wrong. A sign on the mailbox read, "House for sale." And when he peered through the window, the house was empty. No furniture. No signs of life. Just dust-covered floors and a vacant shell of a home. As if no one had lived there in years. Daniel staggered backward. His pulse pounded in his ears. This isn't happening. This isn't happening. And then, a whisper. Low. Ethereal. Right behind him. They forgot you. Daniel spun around, but no one was there. And yet, the shadows at the edge of the street. They seemed to move. Something was watching him. Something not human. And then he knew. He wasn't just forgotten. He was being hunted. Daniel's breath came in short gasps. He stood frozen in front of his childhood home, his mind reeling. He had been erased. No one knew him. No one saw him. And something in the shadows was watching. A deep, twisting sense of dread crawled up his spine. Then, a whisper. Soft. Sinister. Right in his ear. You don't belong here anymore. Daniel spun around. The street was empty. But the shadows at the edge of the road, they moved. Not like the shifting of the wind. Not like anything natural. They were alive. Something was inside them. Something waiting. And then, the streetlights flickered. A dark shape shifted between the flickering pools of light, moving too fast to be human. Daniel stumbled back. His pulse hammered in his throat as his eyes darted between the shadows. There were more of them now. Figures. Tall. Twisted. Wrong. Standing at the edges of his vision. They didn't step into the light. They waited. Watching. Hunting. And then, a voice. Not from the shadows. From the darkest part of his mind. You are almost one of us. Daniel ran. His footsteps slammed against the pavement, breath coming in ragged gasps. He didn't know where he was running, only that he needed to get away. The streets around him blurred as he ran past streetlights, empty stores, abandoned buildings. Then, a figure stepped into his path. Daniel skidded to a stop. A man. Or at least, something that used to be a man. His face was half there, parts of it fading in and out, like smoke trapped in the shape of a human. His eyes, hollow voids. You can't run, Daniel. Daniel's chest tightened. Who are you? His voice shook. The man tilted his head. Like you, I was forgotten. Daniel took a step back. What happens if I can't make someone remember me? The man smiled. A ghastly, stretching smile. Then you become one of us. And then, the streetlights went out. Total darkness swallowed the world. And from the void, the whispers grew louder. Darkness swallowed the street. The streetlights were gone. The buildings, the sky, even the air, all consumed. Daniel's breath hitched. This wasn't normal darkness. This was something else. Something alive. And from its depths, they came. The forgotten ones. Shapes moved in the blackness. Twisted things, shifting and flickering, their bodies melting into the dark like living shadows. No eyes. No faces. Just hollow gaps where their features should be. And they were coming for him. A voice whispered from everywhere and nowhere. You are almost ours. Daniel stumbled backward, heart hammering. He had to run. But there was nowhere to go. The street had vanished. He was standing on nothing. An endless, shifting abyss of dark. The last remnant of the world faded from his sight. Only the shadows remained. And they reached for him. Daniel screamed. Cold, unnatural fingers wrapped around his arms, his legs. The shadows pulled. Dragging him down. And the whispers grew louder. You don't exist. You were never here. Forget. 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 Daniel clawed at the empty air. He couldn't let this happen. He couldn't let himself fade. But it was too late. The darkness consumed him. Then, a voice. Daniel. A distant, echoing voice. Familiar. Daniel's eyes snapped open. For a split second, he saw something. A flash of light. A room. A girl's face. Maya. His sister. Daniel's heart lurched. She remembered him. Somewhere, in the real world, she still remembered. And that meant he could still fight. The shadows recoiled. The forgotten ones hissed, retreating. They could feel it. He wasn't fully gone yet. Not completely erased. Not yet. Daniel gritted his teeth, forcing himself to move, to push against the darkness. He could still escape. If he could just reach the light. But then, something huge stirred in the abyss. Something far worse than the forgotten ones. And it had just noticed him. The abyss rumbled. A deep, hollow vibration shook the darkness around Daniel. The whispers stopped. Even the forgotten ones, those empty, faceless horrors, froze. Something far worse had awakened. And it was coming from below. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. The shadows beneath him rippled. Then, a shape emerged. A massive, writhing thing, shifting and impossible to comprehend. It had no definite form, no face, just a gaping, endless void of twisting, slithering limbs. But it had eyes. Thousands of them. They blinked open, one by one, staring directly at Daniel. And then, it spoke. A voice that wasn't a voice. A sound so deep it rattled his bones, so wrong it twisted his thoughts. You do not belong here. Yet you linger. Daniel trembled. He couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. This thing wasn't just part of the abyss. It was the abyss. The forgotten ones backed away. Even they feared it. Daniel's skin crawled as its voice echoed inside his head. You were meant to be erased. And yet, you resist. Its eyes swirled, moving in impossible directions. And then, it reached for him. Daniel snapped out of his trance. Move. He spun and ran. His feet barely touched the shifting darkness as he sprinted through the abyss. The thing lurched forward, its endless mass of limbs stretching toward him. It didn't chase him like a beast. It shifted reality itself. The space around him bent and twisted, the dark folding over him, trying to pull him in. And the voices returned. Stop fighting. Accept oblivion. Forget, forget, forget. Daniel gritted his teeth. He wasn't going to be erased. Not when Maya still remembered him. Somewhere, back in the real world, a piece of him still existed. That meant he could still get out. He just had to find a way back. Then, a glimpse of something ahead. A tear in the abyss. A flicker of light. A way out. Daniel's pulse pounded. If he could reach it. A shadowy limb slammed into his back. Pain exploded through his body as he was hurled through the darkness. He tumbled, weightless, spinning in the void. And then, he saw the ground open beneath him. A black maw of nothingness, pulling him in. The thing was no longer reaching for him. It was swallowing him whole. And in the last second before he fell, he heard Maya's voice again. Faint. Distant. Daniel. Wake up. Then, everything went black. Daniel fell. Not through air. Not through space. Through nothing. The abyss swallowed him whole, and the last trace of the world vanished. No light. No sound. No feeling. Just emptiness. A place where nothing existed. Not even time. Daniel tried to scream, but he had no voice. He tried to move, but he had no body. He wasn't just lost. He was unraveling. His mind splintered, his thoughts drifting apart like smoke in the dark. He was forgetting himself. He was becoming one of them. Then, a voice cut through the void. Daniel. Hold on. Maya. A shock of lightning surged through his fading mind. A reminder. A connection. Somewhere, in the real world, she was still holding on to him. And that meant, he wasn't gone yet. Daniel focused. Fought. Tried to piece himself back together. The void shuddered. The thing below hissed. It could feel him resisting. The forgotten ones whispered all around him. Let go. You don't exist. Forget. 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 Daniel gritted his teeth. No. The abyss trembled. Then, a tear ripped open in the darkness. A glimpse of the real world. A room. A girl's face. Maya. She was holding a photograph. His photograph. And she was crying. "I remember you," she sobbed. "Come back." The forgotten ones screamed. The void howled. Daniel lunged for the light. But the thing below wasn't done with him. A massive, writhing limb lashed out, wrapping around his body. It pulled, dragging him deeper, back toward the abyss. Daniel fought, clawed, reached for the light. Then Maya spoke his name one last time. "Daniel." And the world exploded in light. Light erupted. Blinding. Burning. Daniel gasped. Air filled his lungs. His body, his real body, jerked upright. He was back. The abyss was gone. No more whispers. No more faceless horrors. No more thing below. Just a dimly lit bedroom. And Maya. She sat in front of him, eyes wide with shock. Her hands trembled as she clutched an old photograph, a picture of him. Tears streaked her face. "Daniel." She whispered. "You're alive." Daniel shuddered. He felt wrong. Like his body wasn't entirely his. Like part of him was still missing. But he was here. He had escaped. Or at least, he thought he had. Maya grabbed him, sobbing. "I thought I lost you forever." Her warmth felt real. Her touch felt solid. Daniel held her, his heart pounding. "I was almost gone, Maya. I was." He stopped. Something was off. The room was too quiet. Maya's grip was too cold. And then the lights flickered. A whisper slithered through the air. "You never left." Daniel's blood turned to ice. Slowly, he turned his head. And in the mirror across the room, he saw them. The forgotten ones. Dozens of faceless shadows, standing just behind him. Watching. Waiting. And at the center, a tall, hollow figure. It wasn't a shadow. It was him. A second Daniel. Empty-eyed. Mouth stretched in a silent, twisted grin. His reflection had stayed behind. And now, it was here. Daniel's stomach dropped. He had brought something back with him. Something that wasn't him. And it wanted his place. The lights died. Maya screamed. And the last thing Daniel saw was his own reflection stepping out of the mirror. Reaching for him. Smiling. Daniel stumbled back. His reflection stepped forward. It moved wrong. Not like a person, but like a thing wearing his skin. It smiled wider. Too wide. Unnatural. The forgotten ones surrounded them, shifting in the dim light, their faceless heads tilting in silent anticipation. This wasn't over. Daniel hadn't escaped. They were still trying to erase him. And his reflection was the key. It wasn't just a copy. It was here to replace him. To take his place in the real world. And drag him back into the abyss. Maya backed away. "Daniel," she whispered, staring between them. She could see it too. "Tell me which one is real." The reflection spoke first. "It's me, Maya." Its voice was perfectly his. "He's the imposter." It pointed at Daniel. Daniel's breath hitched. It was trying to turn her against him. Trying to undo him. He had to act, now. Daniel lunged. The reflection moved at the same time. They collided. And the world fractured. For a split second, Daniel was somewhere else. Not in Maya's room. Not in reality. But in the in-between. The place between existence and erasure. A dark, endless corridor lined with mirrors. And in every reflection, The forgotten ones watched, whispering, "One must stay. One must go." Daniel turned. His reflection stood across from him. It was smiling. "You don't belong anymore," it whispered. And it charged. Daniel fought. But it was like fighting himself. Every move he made, it copied perfectly. Every punch, it dodged. Every escape, it cut him off. And with each passing second, he could feel himself fading. He was losing. The abyss was pulling him back. The forgotten ones were winning. Then, a voice pierced the void. "Maya. You're not him." And suddenly, she was there. Standing in the corridor, holding the photograph. His photograph. She ripped it in half. The reflection screamed. It clawed at its face. Its skin peeled away like paper, revealing nothing beneath. The forgotten ones howled. The mirror corridor shattered. And Daniel woke up. Gasping. Sweating. Maya was there, shaking him. He was back. The reflection was gone. The forgotten ones were gone. The abyss was gone. Maya sobbed, hugging him. "You're real. You're here." Daniel exhaled. For the first time, he felt whole again. He had won. He had survived. But in the mirror across the room, something moved. And deep in the glass, a faceless figure watched. Still waiting. Still hungry.